it's not clear what people talk about when they say quantum.
4 semesters of physics in one sentence.
This is pure spark of genius.
Just give them money and leave them alone.
Simple to build, but it does blow your mind.
One of the great applications of AI.
Only at the edge you will get the quantum computer to work.
Wow.
This cannot possibly be measurable.
That's a relevant point, no?
So that is world-changing. But of course we don't have it yet.
But I like it because it's very tangible and I can understand easily.
I hope for a future where about the communication style that you were thinking about. So I started my career in science, did a PhD at the Maxplank for quantum optics. Then I moved to consulting with the Boston Consulting Group. Now I'm in investing with VSquared, which sort of like is the combination of these two worlds, right? You need to understand the tech side, you need to understand the business side, and the thing that ties it all together is like the people that are doing it.
Yeah.
So the communication styles in science and in consulting are sort of flipped. You're working on complex or complicated things, not necessarily the same thing. But in science, if you explain something to somebody and they don't understand it, then they're an idiot. Okay, whatever. You don't have to waste your time with them.
Yeah.
In consulting, if you explain something to somebody and they don't get it, you're an idiot and you are wasting their time. And I think this is the way communication should always be. It should be tied towards your audience, not towards the sender. So
that's a super good mixture.
That's why I'm a fan of, well, I mean, there are lots of reasons to be a fan of Feynman. But, you know, as I previously said, like, he has this communication style. Make it simple, make it understandable.
Mm-mm.
And I'm not going to do this here because also I think I can't. But there's this great Feynman quote: "Every physicist should start talking, you know, should always start with Feynman quotes." I think when you're giving a talk, out of respect for your audience, 1/3 of the talk should be understood by everybody. Out of respect for the topic, 1/3 should be understood by the experts.
Okay.
And out of respect for nature, 1/3 should be understood by nobody.
This is a perfect reels for social networks. I love it. Yeah, well, thanks for coming. I think maybe we should just frame a little bit why this talk is happening. So in What's in Store Show, what we wanted is to go a bit deeper now. We're in the second season and we've interviewed many people related to VC and startups. And now what we want to do is, following that path, get deep a little bit in some topics that we think are relevant. And quantum, and let's just say quantum so far, is one of them. And I have the luxury of finding you in Munich, that you just told a little bit, just a sentence of what you did, but maybe we need to explain why Maxplank is so relevant also in here, just in case someone is from outside of Germany, to explain what a Maxplank means to study there and to do science there. And yeah, we're going to try to dig a bit deeper into quantum and explain what are basically the way we can organize it. Is at the beginning we can talk about the theory. So what is a quantum? What is a qubit? Excuse me. What is quantum physics, quantum computing? If it makes sense to go into the details, but like highlights, that should be the third that everyone should understand. Then we can get a little bit deeper into certain topics, and then we can even go into investing landscape.
Yep.
So I think that could be understandable. I'm thinking now what third wouldn't be understandable by anyone, but understood by anyone, but we'll see.
Not every topic lends itself to the style of communication, so maybe we don't have to go there.
Okay. So if you want, maybe the best thing would be that, yeah, you can explain why you can talk about quantum, and you can talk maybe about Maxplank and what you studied.
Yeah. So as I said, I'm a physicist by background, and maybe I can illustrate how I chose the Max Planck Institute as the place where I wanted to do my PhD. That's kind of like to give you a little bit of a background there. So I was working at ETH Zurich and was thinking about where to do my PhD, applied at a couple of different places, and Max Planck was the only place where I had the feeling. So I walked in and they showed me what they could measure, and my first reaction was, "This is not possible." Like the level of precision that you have in your instruments, this cannot possibly be measurable. And they said, "So here it is." Like, and by the way, this is old news, right? We measured this last year. I was like, "This is incredible." So what they were able to do is they have a time resolution that's absolutely mind-boggling. But we don't have to go to the technical details right now. What I'm saying is, this was the place where I saw that something that seemed impossible was actually doable, and there's a reason for that. So this is not by chance that you find this at Max Planck. They have an interesting financing structure because they give great people money and freedom. This is not very typical in research. Usually you have to, especially in Europe, you apply for a grant, and then the grant is tied to your application. It's telling you have to do exactly this. Max Planck just says, okay, you can of course apply for grants and get more money, but you get like a base financing, and with that base financing you can do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
And they only give this to the very best people, and by the very best people I mean the directors of the institutes. And the results speak for themselves. So the Max Planck for quantum optics has 2 Nobel Prizes under their belt.
Wow.
And I think that is the result. So this is fundamentally a moonshot outcome, right? You found something that is so far out there. It's not a 2% improvement on something else. It's a huge step. It's a huge increment. It's a moonshot. And to me, this is very much like a venture case, You're thinking about it like investing. Also there, you need to find the best team, and you need to give that team money and freedom. If if you find the best team, just think, if you had invested in, and I realize he's a politically challenging person at the moment, don't want to comment on that, but if you had invested in Elon Musk's businesses 20 years ago, and you had told him, okay, I'll give you these milestones. In half a year, you have to deliver this. And then half a year later, you have to deliver that. I want these reports. I want that reports. Do you think it would have helped? Or do you think it would have made the business outcome worse? So this approach yields fantastic results, but only yields fantastic results if your selection criteria are super tough. So that's the kind of place that Max Planck is. And I think that there's parallels between research and business/venturing.
Yeah, I love the way you phrase it, actually, because then the only difference with VC maybe is that with that methodology, you don't need to do any portfolio management, because your only job is just give them money and leave them alone. Don't do portfolio management, don't do QRs and things like that. Just leave them be.
Well, I think you have to know where you want to step in and where you shouldn't step in. So if I look at our portfolio, so we are very, very tech heavy. And that comes with teams that don't have business experience. So these guys are all incredible. Like, they're super duper smart and driven. Yeah. But sometimes there's just stuff that, it's a lot easier if you've seen it before. So, and as a VC, you see a lot of cases, you see a lot of companies, you talk to a lot of founders, you talk to a lot of other VCs. So you just have this breadth of knowledge, not necessarily depth in every topic, but you can recognize if something is going wrong, or if somebody maybe doesn't have the commercial focus that's necessary, and you can sort of gently prod them in the right direction.
Yeah.
So I think there is something to do there on portfolio management, but I think less is more sometimes.
Yeah. I agree, and I love the approach. And then the thing is that you complemented, as you said before, with consultancy at BCG, and now an investment. So if we will skip that part, maybe, because I think the topic that we have to cover is so vast that but people can research, they can find you on LinkedIn, they can see your accomplishments there. The thing is, to establish a baseline, I would say that maybe we start with the theory, no? So what is so quantum, when it started at the beginning, it was nothing that people could explain. I think it was in the natural physics, there's this open sky and there are two black clouds, that there's relativity and quantum, because that was not able to be explained by regular physics. So how to jump from there to the current situation of the quantum computer, for example? Like, can you just walk us a little through like the breakthrough of quantum?
Okay, let me think. Okay, I think I'd like to start with the so the very, very beginning of quantum theory is a fantastic example for the fact that basic research is unpredictable, and that is great. Okay, so the very first quantum hypothesis. So first of all, why is it called quantum? It's called quantum because in our natural world, things are not quantized; they are continuous. So, like the distance between us, I can move a little bit closer, a little bit further away. It doesn't feel like I can only be here or there, right? So there's no steps.
Correct.
Or the steps are infinitely small. Quantum means that there are steps, there are increments, there are building blocks, and they are distinct, right? There's no half an electron, there's one electron. And the electron can only be here or there. It cannot be in between for certain settings, and I can get to that. And that is radical. That comes out of nowhere, pretty much. And it comes even more out of nowhere if you look at the example where it was found. Funny enough, so I didn't know you were going to ask this question, but there's a storyline behind this that fits perfectly, actually. So funny enough, this ties back to Max Planck. So his his personal story was that he was thinking about which fields to explore, and he was walking. This is anecdotal. I don't know if we can verify this in a hard way, but I think he told the story himself. So he was walking through different labs and talking to professors, and then the physics professors actually told him, I wouldn't recommend you to go into physics because, we're almost done here. There's like one or two things that we have left to explore, and then physics is over. And like the mindset is, hey, science is a finite problem. Once you have discovered everything that's out there, well, then you have it. Okay.
Yeah.
And philosophically, that could be true. But yeah, it turns out that one of these things that he was looking at, the unexplained things, was what's called black body radiation. So a black body is an object that absorbs all light. It does radiate light out, but everything that's coming in is, first of all, it's just like swallowed. And a very tangible example for that is a large room with a tiny window. All of the light that's coming in is staying in, right? And then there were two explanations for how to model the radiation that's coming out of this room. So this sounds super technical. Does it have anything to do with quantum so far? I mean, like, it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah,
certainly.
true.
And they could measure that curve, and the curve was just like it had a bump somewhere. Okay, it started low, had a bump, and it went low again. So, and there were two explanations that worked very well for the beginning and for the end. One of the explanations worked for the beginning of the curve, one of them worked for the end of the curve, but like none of them worked for the entire thing. And then out of nowhere, Max Planck says, but what if we work with the assumption that energy is quantized in this, and then we can get to this equation, and then we get to a curve that explains the whole black body radiation. It's like, wait, what? That has where does it come from? It's out of nowhere. This is pure spark of genius, and yeah. So that started the whole thing.
Wow, I didn't know that it was actually Max Planck, because I knew this metaphor with the sky was from Lord Kelvin, I think. So I think it's a bit earlier, but I didn't know that he started with this. And maybe we can now get a little bit, and I don't know if it's a big jump or not. You will tell me. We can go maybe straight to bits and quantum bits and qubits, because I think that, okay, that's the origin. So basically, it also relates on how some electrons move in a wave way instead of.
So here's the thing. This quantum hypothesis kickstarted a whole lot of weird stuff. So it turns out that if you start with this hypothesis and then you have like a ton of super smart people, I mean, super smart as in like once in a century kind of mind, smart people, and they get together and just build and build and build upon that hypothesis. Then from that weird hypothesis, you get other weird hypotheses. And then in total, this image that you create, that leads to the particle wave duality that you are hinting at.
Okay.
Let me think if there is a way for me to draw that line.
Yeah, I'm thinking how to link both. I know I want to get to this river. I don't know how to this part of the land. I don't know how to cross the river.
It's actually not so easy. So
No.
I would say this is like 4 semesters of physics that you would like in one sentence, but I'll give it a go.
Here we go, 4 semesters of physics in one sentence.
Okay, I'll try, and then you can let me know if that's understandable at all, or if that makes sense. So, so now we have this base assumption that things can be quantized. So there is this like building block logic in there. There's one quantum of energy, another quantum of energy, and now you can think about how you describe these quantized objects.
Mm-hmm.
So let's think we want to put one of these objects in a box. And we say, okay, it has to stay inside the box. It cannot move out. So at the edge of the box, it's like the very edge of the box, its probability function is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
So the likelihood of finding it there has to be 0, because everything has to be continuous, right? You can't have any weird jumps in these functions. So it has to be 0. It has to be 0 at the other edge of the box. And then you can say it can wiggle around in the middle of the box. Okay, so, and then you can think, okay, what's the lowest amount of wiggles that you can have? It's 1. If there's no wiggle, then there is no particle, there's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have 1 wiggle, okay, then that's the lowest. Then if you have 2 wiggles, okay, then you see, okay, the faster you wiggle something, the more energy it has.
Okay.
Right? So, and that's how you build up this system of, you're locking something in a box, and that's a particle. You're putting that particle in a box, and that defines where it is allowed to be in terms of energy and how it is allowed to move. Okay. And now here's the thing. That box is a semiconductor, and the particle is an electron. And so that is the fundamental building principle of how to understand, well, all of like this modern electronics. You need the particle in a box. From that you get band structures, which is what these, like the wiggling, is called. And from that you get, all of the predictions on how electrons behave, and that is the basis of modern computing. That's like,
I think
it wasn't quite one sentence, but
when you started to put the electron in a box, I thought that you were going to go straight to the experiment of the double split. How is it?
Double-slit. Yeah.
Double-slit, the double-slit experiment. But you went somewhere different. But okay.
I mean, this is honestly an experimental conversation for me, right?
Yeah.
And it's been a while since I've been a hardcore physicist.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the double slit? It feels like you want to talk about the double slit.
No, it's not necessary. But I always thought, so when I tried to understand something about quantum and I saw the double slit experiment, I immediately understood the magic of it, because I was like, oh, this implies that when you observe something, it changed its behavior.
Yes.
And even it implies that it could be anywhere in because the fact that the two particles are related to each other, if one is somewhere and something happens to it, it happens a similar thing to the other one. So this is teleportation and things like that. Obviously, I extrapolated to something fictional because I like it. And that's why, like, for me, I try to illustrate it to myself in the quantum with this experiment because I thought, oh, again, I can understand this easily because you see the mass of the points in the wall, kind of the marks of the electrons, and you say, okay, I understand that it's very funny because they seem that when you observe them, they change. But maybe you want to give a brief explanation of what it is because you will probably explain it way better than what I just did. So the people know what we're talking about, and then we can go somewhere else, of course. But
so,
if it makes sense and you can relate it to what you were saying before.
I think now we get into this territory where, I don't want to say anything incorrect.
Ooh, okay.
But I also don't want to say, but I do have to stay a little bit like superficial because otherwise, as I said before, math is the language of physics.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be speaking that language now. It's generally best spoken with a pen in your hand.
True.
So the double-slit experiment is a way to highlight the wave-particle duality.
You already explained it way better, you see? In one sentence.
If you... So the way you build up the experiment is you have a source. It could be a light source, but it could also be an electron source or a proton source. Or people have done this with molecules. So just any source of quantum objects. You have a double slit, and behind that you have a detector. So when you run the experiment and you run it at low intensity, so not a lot of particles at the same time, then you see two things. The first thing that you see is on your detector, you see individual clicks. You say, okay, here's a click and there's a click. That's exactly what you would expect from a particle. So because every particle does its own thing and clicks once at some position on your detector. Okay. But also, if you just wait a while and let the particles pile up and pile up and pile up, then you will see a pattern emerge. It's called a diffraction pattern. And that diffraction pattern is very characteristic of wave behavior. So you see that fundamentally these quantum particles, they do both things. And now the weird and confusing part about that is you could sort of, from your classical world, you could sort of say, yeah, okay, so these particles somehow interact with each other, and that's how they form the wave. But you remember, you're running your experiment on such a low intensity that you only have one click at a time. Mm-hmm. So what does that particle interact with at all?
Yeah.
Like to form that wave? And the answer is it interacts with itself because it itself is a wave, right? So so that whole package is just not congruent with our understanding. Like if we just go through this world, observing our everyday lives, we would never get in contact with anything like this. Mm. So that's why it's very nice. It's very easy to build up, You just need a little bit of light, a double slit, and a good detector. And people have done this a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it already, it's simple to build, but it does blow your mind.
Yeah.
It blew mine.
Yeah, mine too. Yeah, I had to watch it several times, I think, because at the beginning I didn't know what was going on and why. But so I think that from here we can maybe do a little step now to the bits and qubits that I want to do first, because a bit is something that could be yes or no. It has two positions, and a qubit is something that could be infinite, or infinite parts of yes and infinite part of no's. I don't know how to phrase it.
Actually, so I think I kind of know where you're going with this.
Okay.
But I would like to take a little bit of a different route.
Okay, please.
And not go for the qubit straight away, but first say, okay, let's look at analog computing.
Okay.
And then we're going to make the case that quantum computing is analog computing.
Love it.
So the zeros and ones that you're referring to, that's what we use for digital computing, right? There's no uncertainty on this, like it's either 0 or it's a 1. And if you compute something, that what you do is you take the system that you want to model, and you map it onto your digital space. So naturally, you are making assumptions, and you're just like sort of like simplifying things, and then you have it in your digital world, and in your digital world, you run all of your calculations, and then you map that back onto the system that you want to see. And the great thing about that is your digital world is extremely pliable. You can model anything you want. Like your zeros and your ones, they're nice, you know. they behave well. They don't criticize you for annoyingly working with them. And the downside is that you have to do this flip, right? So you have to do this like matching onto the system that you want to simulate. I already just claimed that simulation is what we're going for, and you're going to see why in a second. Now, what you could do differently is you could just build that system, so to say, or build an analogous system, as opposed to like making that flip to the digital world. You just build an analog system. Like, I don't know, you want to, what's a complicated system? Let's look at a waterfall. You want to see what does let's say there's a huge waterfall. It's like 100 meters deep or something. And you want to simulate that. And like bringing that in digital world is very hard. But what you could also do is you could just build a 10 centimeter high waterfall and sort of like try to extrapolate from there. So that would be the analog computing route. You just build the thing, maybe a simpler representation of the thing.
Okay.
And the upside to that is if you build your model well, it's super close to the end result. It's super close to what you are trying to simulate, and it's super, super fast.
Yeah. Because
it doesn't have to do this whole like, we flip to the digital domain, or we do all of our bit manipulations, all the programming on top. But the downside is it can only do one thing, right? So you build your waterfall, it can only be a waterfall. You know, you don't have, we have a CPU and a GPU, and we can do everything we want with it. So it's very specialized. So that's like in general analog computing. It has huge promise because the energy efficiency is like it's orders and orders of magnitude better because you don't have all that overhead of the digital world. So a quantum computer is a special case of an analog computing system. And the reason why it's so useful is because it is actually quite generalizable because lots of things are made out of quantum objects. So if you want to simulate a molecule, then it's great to have a computer that is itself, because the molecule is a quantum object and it's composed of quantum objects. So if you want to simulate that, then you'd best do that with a quantum computer, which itself is composed of quantum objects. And those quantum objects are the qubits.
Okay.
So, and then what you would do is, so you would take your qubits, we get to what those can be in a minute. You take those qubits and arrange them in a way that they kind of resemble a molecule.
Okay.
So you don't necessarily build a molecule, but you just say, okay, I move my one qubit here and my other qubit there. I know if they're at this distance, they interact in that way. And that's the same way they interact with if they were in a molecule.
Okay.
So you kind of like copy the molecule onto your quantum computer. And then you just let loose and say, yo, molecule, do your thing. And then the system evolves and you watch the system, but you know exactly how this corresponds to the molecule.
But what is then the difference? Because you said with the waterfall, you can just replicate in the digital world with analog computing the waterfall. And you can also replicate the molecule.
Yes.
So what's the difference of the molecule replicated with the traditional computing and the quantum computing?
Well, the problem is that this switch from the switch to the digital world requires you to model everything that can happen with bits. And if you just multiply out all of the possibilities of how these quantum objects can behave and evolve, then you end up at a huge number of bits that you need to truly model the system.
Yeah.
So in the end, it's a numbers game. You could do it, but it would be incredibly, ridiculously complex. That's why we don't really do that, right? We don't really try to just like say, okay, we model the system exactly as it is. We take a lot of shortcuts, which is great. I'm not dissing that at all. I'm a huge fan of quantum computing, but AI is making incredible progress in fields where we would have 10 years ago, we would have said, okay, we need the quantum computer for that. And now AI is doing it, like protein folding, for example. Proteins are very large molecules, and the way that they, arrange is, of course, very, very important for the way our lives work. AI is very, very good at predicting how that works.
Get it.
So, but what AI is fundamentally not doing is actually simulating the details of the process.
Because it's too much computing power. They get stuck. There's so many options and variables that they cannot forecast or predict all of them.
So it's a much smarter approach, right? I mean, but pretty much what I'm saying is you cannot brute force these simulations with classical computers. You can brute force it with a quantum computer because that's exactly what it is meant to do.
Okay.
But you can't do it with a classical computer. But then, of course, we are smart enough to say, well, then we don't brute force it, right? Then we just find other ways.
Yeah. And if I can imagine in a case that I got enthusiastic about related to AI, and then you tell me how that would apply to quantum and how can you translate it. So
let's see.
So what I saw is that one of the great application of AI that they were doing in some, let's call it, Cancer Research Institute, it was that, okay, there are certain levels of and types of cancers that we don't know how to cure yet, especially if they're too advanced, but we know there are ways to do it. Like we've seen that this is possible. We know it is possible to cure them. We don't know how. Let's assume this.
Okay.
For the sake of the project. And then what they do with AI is like, okay, now test all of these potential solutions that I have for this cancer that is expressed in this way, test all of this and give me the answers that will result in a positive outcome. So curing the cancer.
Yeah.
And with that, like the way I imagine the simulation is that it runs and it's like, okay, you have a problem here and I'm going to put it in even simpler. You have one color in here that is purple and you want this purple to become white. So you mix purple with red. Does it white? No. You mix purple with green. Does it become white? And maybe in the end, you don't find even a color. So, but that's how I imagine that they're doing this simulation. So with quantum, again, what is the change in this specific case? Does it make sense? Have you seen anything similar? You can tell me it doesn't make sense. Just put another example.
No, I'm thinking. So maybe not specifically for curing cancer, but for finding drugs in general. This is something that AI is being applied to a lot, right?
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of companies that are working on this because if you look at the pharma funnel, then they have like tons and tons of molecules that they could theoretically be playing with, but you just because of resources, you can't take all of them into the clinic. So they have to cut down the funnel.
Yep.
So they have all of these this huge multitude of options, and they have to cut it down somehow. And the very first step for cutting it down these days is AI. So they're just saying, okay, give me all the molecules in here that are not toxic. Give me all the molecules in here so that I'm not going to kill the patient. Because killing the cancer is relatively easy, actually. Yeah. But
yes, true. Good point.
Give me all of those that are water soluble. Give me all of those that are, and so on. And so with that, you can really whittle down the number of available options, and then you can go into your classical, the lab trials and then the clinical trials and all of that stuff. I think I would be hard pressed to say how specifically quantum would make this specific example better. I I mean, there's the general point of you being able to understand molecules at a fundamental level. And I think this is a very important point, with a lot lower energy requirements. So at the point when you can run your quantum computer, it will be a lot more energy efficient. Because, I mean, fundamentally speaking, we are, so there's the German expression, you're shooting sparrows with cannons. Because, I mean, if you just look at like how energy intense is it to use an LLM? You go to your phone and you bring up ChatGPT, like how much power do these data centers use? And then you compare it to what's happening in the human brain. You see, okay, like this is orders of magnitude. We cannot possibly. Again, I think we're going to have trouble brute forcing this approach. There's ways to get around that, and I think one of the ways is quantum computing.
Got it. And why is it? Because we're saving a lot of energy, but why is it so difficult to build a quantum computer?
Yeah. So I was thinking what you were going to ask me before I waltzed in here. And I was thinking that we had been at a different point when you asked that question. So let me take one step back, because you wanted to talk about qubits. What is a qubit?
Yeah.
Right? So you mentioned these before. Fundamentally, it's just a very small building block of your system that has a defined ground state and a defined excited state. So that's your 0 and your 1, right? And so this could be an electron that's trapped somewhere. It could be an ion, it could be an atom. And these systems only appear to be quantum in very special circumstances. Because again, you walk around, you go into the supermarket and you're buying tomatoes, and 0 quantum in your life, right? That you don't experience it at all. Because you have to really force matter into behaving purely quantum. You have to make sure that there are no disturbances. Otherwise, the states get destroyed. So, and one of those things that you have to do is you have to make things very, very cold. Because if they're not super cold, then, like, what is heat? Heat is stuff that's wiggling around uncontrollably, right? And then this wiggling around is exchange of energy. So if there's something that's very hot, I don't know, let's say I have a glass of water in front of me. Let's say I put some hot water on top of this. Then after a while, the entire glass will have the same temperature. Because the heat just moves through the system, because everything is wiggling and moving. And let's say you have prepared a very fragile state of matter and you want to do computation with that. And then something right next to that wiggles all the time and transfers information to your state and changes that state. It fundamentally destroys your quantum computer.
Okay.
So the difficulty is that these quantum systems are very, very fragile. So you need to shield them super well from the environment, but you still have to interact with them, right? So you still have to get information in and out. And
without them getting pissed, I guess.
Exactly. And you have to manipulate them in very special ways. So as I said before, you want to make your qubits interact with each other as if they were in a molecule. So you have to tell them that somehow, right?
Yeah.
And so that means you have to all the time address your qubits without destroying them. And that leads to a lot of technical challenges. So it gets to the point where you just say, like, for example, for superconducting qubits, one of the problems is you have to send a lot of signals in. So you need a lot of cables, and cables carry heat. Just because it's a physical object, everything conducts heat. You need this stuff to be very cold. And when I say very cold, I mean like very, very cold, ridiculously cold.
Like,
okay, we get to
okay.
in 1 second. But that's just one of the examples. So you have a lot of cables coming in because you need a lot of signals. And the cables, like if you say, okay, I need 10 times as many qubits, but that means I need 10 times or maybe even more as many cables. okay, that's so much heat that my fridge doesn't work anymore. Okay, now I'm kind of stuck. And this is just one tiny example. And there's great companies working on solutions to that. But there's so many things you have to solve. There's just so many things you have to get right to get the system to work. There's no way to just, I don't know, hack something together in an afternoon. This is absolutely pointless. So I don't know if you want to talk about the temperature thing. It's more of a general physics point rather than a quantum point, as in what is temperature and what is cold.
I would say that if you know more or less the number, because I remember I saw the IVM one, I think, and it was minus 237 degrees or something like that.
273.
273 degrees, minus 273 degrees.
Yes.
This is, I think, because I wanted to just give a brief number of how cold is cold in our measure. So for our measure, minus 273 degrees, it's quite cold.
Yeah, but here's the thing. If it's colder than you think.
Even?
Well, because, like, okay, and this is a general remark. I don't know if you want to keep this in. So if I had told you it's minus 400 degrees, you would have said, well, it sounds even colder. But that temperature cannot exist.
Oh.
Because, so what is temperature? Temperature is stuff wiggling around.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, like, there's no more wiggling around. Like, everything stops. You know, if there's no wiggling around, that is absolute zero, right?
Okay.
And that is pretty much exactly minus 273.
That makes sense then.
So the reason why they're not going to minus 280 is because there is no 200.
There is
280. No. It does not exist.
I didn't know that.
So they are very, very close to the absolute zero. And let's not use Celsius. Let's use Kelvin.
Okay.
So 0 Kelvin is absolute zero. These guys are operating at 20 millikelvin.
Oh.
So, and 1 Kelvin is as much as 1 Celsius. So 20 millikelvin, that is very, very close to zero.
Uh-huh.
You know, if you said, oh, it's 20 millicelsius, I would say, dude, it doesn't really make sense. Just call it zero. Yeah. It's fine. But for absolute zero, this makes a difference.
Of course.
So that's why I'm saying this is colder than you think, because now you maybe get a glimpse of how close these guys are operating to not the technical limit, to the absolute physical limit. So this is not like, in 10 years we will go to minus 250, minus 350. No, this is not possible. Shit. It just conceptually does not exist. So these guys are at the edge. And only at the edge you will get the quantum computer to work.
Wow.
And that's why it's hard.
But it already requires a lot of energy then as well.
The cooling?
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. So there's a difference between keeping it cold and cooling it down. Cooling it down requires energy. Keeping it cold just requires shielding.
Okay.
So in continuous operations, it's not that much.
So you normally, once you turn on the quantum computing, you better keep it on.
I mean, usually, yeah, you want to keep it cold because also it takes time to cool it down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can imagine.
So it's so I remember talking to the colleagues who were working with their cryostats. It's usually a few days of downtime if you warm up the entire system.
Wow.
Well, because I mean, obviously, and this is not, when I say I call it a fridge because people call it a fridge, but it's you just go there, open it up, take out a Coke at minus 273. That's not how it works.
The absolute zero, and then you put and okay. Following with a quantum computer, then, if so I will tell you actually. I will take a different approach too. I'll tell you what I've heard, and you tell me if this is right or not, and why.
Or maybe if I don't know.
Oh, you don't know. But the thing is, so what I've heard is that the biggest and the best quantum computers out there, they have like 500 qubits in it, more or less working. But in order to properly simulate a quantum scenario, you need 1 million qubits, which it seems that we're quite far away from that. So why is this difference, and why do we need 1 million qubits and it doesn't work with 500? And what's the simulation now? I have many questions related to this difference.
Yes. So why do you need a lot of qubits to do anything? Well, I mean, first of all, if you look at the number of bits you have in your phone, it's quite large.
How many do I have?
So I think, just in terms of storage, I think this thing has 128 gigabytes, and a byte is 8 bits. So it's around 1,000 gigabits roughly. So that's 1,000 billion. That's 10 to the 12. What's that word for that? Is that a trillion?
I won't answer any mathematical questions to you.
I think it's a trillion. So you get a trillion bits on your phone, right? Just for storage. So a million qubits doesn't sound like a lot then, actually, right?
Yeah, it depends always when you compare it to.
So really, it is in its infancy, and it gets a little bit nastier because so people are talking about two different definitions of qubit. The one is a physical qubit, and the other is a logical qubit. So what's the difference? If you just let's take an atom-based quantum computer. The number of physical qubits you have is just the number of atoms you have in there.
Got it.
But you can't use every atom for calculations. You have to, combine them in clever ways in order to correct for errors. So there's this number of physical qubits that you have to combine in order to get to a logical qubit, which is like the unit of computation that you want to use. And that's in the hundreds, right? So you need a few hundred, different number for different approaches. And I don't want to give you a hard number because honestly, I don't know it well enough to really comment. But that really takes it down a notch, right? So if you say, okay, why do I need a million qubits to do something useful? Well, actually, maybe I just need a few thousand qubits, but they need to be logical qubits, right?
Got it. And building on top of this, I don't know if it makes sense already to jump to cases, but maybe before is actually a question that maybe makes sense. So why then are we talking so much about quantum computing and all the, it's going to break all the security as far as we know it, blah, 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 if we're not even there yet? And I know that some solutions that are out there, what they're doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just simulating with some algorithms a quantum scenario and applying and operating there.
Yeah. So we're in this weird place where we're pretty sure we're going to build this. We don't know when we're going to build this.
That's a relevant point, no?
It's very relevant, yes. Especially for, I'm thinking about fund life cycles and stuff like that. But maybe before that, why do we even want to build this? Well, because, it is, and you're saying, why are we even talking about this? Well, we're talking about this because the promise of quantum is, for select applications, near unlimited compute power. I'm using the word unlimited, which is weird because everything is limits. But seen from what we have today, it's just so much more that if you were to brute force the kind of topics that we were talking about, it would take you on a conventional supercomputer like the age of the universe. So it would be like infinitely long for all practical intents and purposes. It's not mathematically infinite.
But what is the case that comes to your mind when you think of a case that works? Because when you explain this and you say, it will take me the whole universe to do something, I'm trying to think of a task.
Yeah. So I think of simulating materials because fundamentally, and that's, by the way, Feynman, who came up with this?
Who else?
So fundamentally, his idea was, well, if you want to simulate molecules or like the building blocks of our life, you would want to do that with a quantum system because the building blocks of our life are quantum, right? Molecules are quantum systems. And the way they interact with each other, that's what happens at a micro scale in our bodies. That's what happens in our surroundings. That's what happens in our tech devices.
But everything is quantum or space.
Well, this is the arrogant physicist's argument. It says, hey, if you zoom in far enough, everything's physics.
Yeah.
And then you realize, well, that's great, but like the systems that I can truly understand with physics are usually quite simple because I have to understand them at a very fundamental level.
Okay.
So then you zoom out a little bit more and you find all these ways of describing things like chemistry and biology and AI and so on. Sorry, I was saying, why is it interesting and what is a practical problem?
Yeah.
So I was saying simulation materials because at the molecular, at the atomic level, materials are quantum. So and that's what you can do in pharma. That's what you can do with just like coming up with new materials for anything really. I don't know. Could be semiconductors. Could be coatings. Could be whatever really. Anything where you need new materials. I think we could use them everywhere, pretty much, right? So, and I think that is that is also a use case where this. If you can do a brute force approach, you don't have to be as smart with your approach. So that's great. That gives you the option to explore. That gives you the option to just do stuff and see what happens. Because if you have to be smart about it and know exactly what you want to be asking for, you kind of you have to have more in mind already. So if you have this computing power, you can just say, okay, let's just try. That's huge freedom. So I'm convinced that once we have the system working, we will find so many ways to use it.
Yeah, I think so too.
It won't be we won't be able to use it for everything, and that's a remark that Jensen Huang also made. It's specific types of problems. It's high compute, low memory type of problems, but they are out there, right? And one of them is this code cracking thing too. So that's an application that I think to me this is like materials analysis of materials is the application that I'm the most direct application that I can see, and the first application that I would be interested in. There's other stuff out there, optimization problems and all that sort of thing. But you were asking, why are we talking about it at all? Why are we talking about it now? If we're saying, hey, it's so far away. We knew that this was going to be, we didn't know. We were guessing that this was going to be possible for a long time now. It's getting ever more tangible. It's getting more in the realm of engineering and less in the realm of science. And so I think we can make better and better predictions for when we can actually get something useful out of this. But the promise was so big and the concept was so clear that we had been able to talk about this for such a long time. Now we have to talk about it in a little bit of a different way, I think, because so now we have a bunch of modalities, like a bunch of ways to build a quantum computer, superconducting qubits, atoms, ions, other stuff. And we can sort of see the tech roadmap that leads us to working with these. Like, for example, the cables that I mentioned, right? Yeah. The fridges. Yeah. We're going to need pretty good fridges to make this thing work. These companies are out there now. There's actually a company in Munich working on these fridges.
Which one?
It's called Qtra.
Okay.
And that's what's sort of changing in the company landscape, in the investors landscape, is that I think, 5 years ago or so, it was mostly companies that were thinking about building the full stack. Like they were building the computer. And ever since, it has like a whole ecosystem has developed around this that said, okay, like I know you want to build the whole computer, but you don't want to make every cable. You don't want to make every connection. You don't want to make all the algorithms. You don't want to, and so on and so on. So the value chain is developing. The huge challenge here is that typically, I would expect value chains to develop once the core is there and functional and it's making money, and other people are realizing, oh, this is making money. I better tag onto this. And then you have Cisco coming into existence. Yeah. Because everybody already has computers and they need to be connected. So nobody has a quantum computer that really works and that really needs to be connected. But there are companies out there that are claiming we are the Cisco of quantum, right? So we are at this stage where all of the support ecosystem has to come into existence and has to start scaling. But we don't have the first basic building block yet. We don't have the working quantum computers, and we definitely don't. Well, we don't have them working in a way that solves real-world problems yet. They do work. They do solve problems, but those problems are not relevant yet.
I've heard about a problem now that you mentioned this. By the way, I think we won't be. I'll just look at the watch. We won't be able maybe to tackle the all the examples today of what I wanted to tackle yet that are these cases in investment and the thesis. So maybe we have to leave that for another day. But if you
it's
want
up to
go,
you.
But
You let me know.
But
I'm just here rambling.
Okay, that's your take. That's not mine. But one of the problems I've been told actually last week was that sometimes for whatever reason your airplane or your airship or whatever got hacked or has a problem with the GPS and cannot locate where to land.
Yes.
It seems that there's a case that you, with the magnetic location on Earth, you can actually replace GPS if a problem happens.
Yes.
And it seems that these problems will be more and more common because GPS is hackable.
Yes.
So if you build a quantum solution on that, that's not hackable. That could replace GPS. And I like that as a problem. So can you elaborate a little bit?
Very good. So actually that highlights the fact that it's not clear what people talk about when they say quantum. So
nice. Love it.
What we can... Let's take a step back. And we started at the very beginning, right? We said, it's just the hypothesis that there's like one electron, there's not half an electron. And then we built up this whole thing. And so fundamentally, quantum is just everything that requires this quantization of stuff in order to work. So fundamentally, all of semiconductors are quantum.
Got it.
But now when people say quantum, they mean different things. So they usually talk about this trifecta of quantum computing, which is what we spent most of our time talking about, quantum communications,
yes,
and quantum sensing.
Okay.
So and the timeline for these three is radically different. So quantum computing is, hard to predict. So some companies have very clear roadmaps. You can go to the IQM website, full disclosure, IQM, a portfolio company of our fund. But they have published their roadmap. So you can just look at it. You can see, what are these guys expecting to get done in 2027? And that, to me, is a huge credibility boost. And that's why I'm saying it's more engineering than science now. Because this stuff is out there. You can check it. And they're predicting their performance in a very granular way. So that's quantum computing. Then quantum communication is this whole idea of if the measurement changes the system, then I can understand whether something has been measured or not. So I know whether I was listened to. So in a very simplified manner. So that's saying, hey, there is a way to build fundamentally secure system, like physically secure systems.
Yeah.
It's not. There's a huge challenge in practical applications because the question is, what kind of hardware do you need for that? How robust is that? But there's lots of great companies working on that as well. And then there's quantum sensing, and quantum sensing is sort of flipping the whole idea on its head. Like previously we said, you need to shield this quantum system from everything because it gets destroyed by everything. It's so sensitive and it's such a crybaby. And here we're saying, no, we take that. We take that crybaby and we listen very closely. When does it cry and how does it cry? And so we take a qubit and say, okay, this qubit is easily disturbed by magnetic fields. Wait, that means it can sense magnetic fields with ridiculous precision. And then you just watch the qubit very closely and it tells you something about the magnetic field. So that's just one example. But the navigation system that you explained is, Earth has a magnetic field, which is, let's just say it's static for now. So if you know exactly where you are now and how the magnetic field is developing, then you know where you are going. So, and this is what these guys are doing. So And that's a radically different timescale because I think there are. So either there are quantum sensing products in the market, or they're going to be very, very soon. So this is much more on the timescale of classical deep tech thinking. If if a founder comes to you and says, "Okay, I'm building this thing and I'm going to bring it to market in 2 years," if it's a quantum computer, maybe not. Quantum sensing, absolutely possible.
Got it.
And
this is a quantum sensing example.
This is a quantum sensing example.
But I like it because it's very tangible and I can understand easily what the problem is. But okay.
I can give you one other problem that I'm extremely excited about. So if you can measure magnetic fields very, very precisely, you can do a lot of things. Like you can listen to what's going on inside of matter, like for example, inside of your body. And there is no physical limit to like an MRT device, right? I mean, MRT is magnetic resonance tomography. So you can sort of like, without going into the technical details, measuring magnetic fields is very important. And these things are huge, these systems. They cost millions, and then they're even more expensive because you need a reinforced floor for the hospital to even carry that machine so it doesn't collapse the building. And the reason why they're so huge is because you have to put in huge magnets because the signal strength depends on the magnet that you're putting in. But what if you were able to measure 10, 100 times more precisely? You wouldn't need all that big thing. And if you don't need all that big system and you make it cheap, you can put it wherever, And I hope for a future where you don't need X-ray anymore because you have a cheap MRT at every doctor's office. And if you had, and there's companies working with that as well.
Even in every house. I don't know if it's too cheap, but
I mean, if you have this combination of that type of MRT scanner plus AI that analyzes the images, you can, like, this is your screening, this is your health screening. So you combine that with liquid biopsy, which is sort of like analyzes the stuff that's flowing through your blood.
That's brutal.
Then if you combine these two, then your health check is you take a little bit of blood, you go into the machine, you do this every half a year, and you detect like every cancer at its early stage. That is world changing. But of course we don't have it yet, right? So now I'm really talking like a VC, as in, this is like the big fantastic thing, but in the end, but we don't have it.
It is sensing. We could. Yes. It's not that long. I mean, it could be. Well,
I think this will happen in. I think this will happen in a few years, actually.
That's insane. That's insane.
So when I say this will happen, what will happen? Will we see the first tech demos that it can be built in principle? Mm-hmm. That's what I mean. Mm-hmm. Will it be scaled out? Will it be in every doctor's office?
We wait a little bit.
No. It will have to wait.
But still, if you have the energy and the conviction and the use is so obvious, that helps to the spread of the ideas and the prototypes and then the final products.
I think this is the point. This is the point where deep tech is a very challenging space because you actually got to build this, and then your enemy is no longer the VC that you just can't get convinced, or the customer that you just can't get convinced, and your enemy is physics, and
tougher.
Physics is not easily convinced.
Is quantum computing going to break Bitcoin? I needed to ask this question. For the reels, for the TikTok and the Instagram. I needed to phrase it like that. I'm sorry.
I actually don't know. And I think that the question is, is it Bitcoin specifically, or is it all of crypto?
I would say Bitcoin especially because it's the reference and
I'm not very knowledgeable on that subject, but my general assumption would be that, Bitcoin is sort of like a legacy system. It had huge first mover advantage in the market, but tech-wise, there's way more advanced systems. And I could see maybe it will break Bitcoin, but I'm sure that there's other crypto schemes that are quantum secure.
Yeah. Well, I think I've heard some arguments to defend it, saying that the SHA could be improved, so you have a quantum encryption there, and at the beginning, blah blah blah. But I'm not. Again, I don't know. I just needed to phrase it like that. But that being said, so we're already more than an hour, and I promised you that it was going to be an hour. But I think the topic is it's even bigger than what I expected. So if you want, what we can do is that today we can call it a day, and then we can do one that is more related to quantum and the areas of investing, and we can dig into companies and specific cases. We can do part 2, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Then I would say that thanks a lot for coming, and hope to see you very soon here.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.